as many as 309 million people. In fact, the 2024 summer cropping season in the Eastern Cape is currently underway, and more than 22,000 hectares of grain are expected to be planted by more than 10,000 communal and emerging farmers, while the Department of Rural Development and Agrarian Reform is putting 80 million rand into the project this year. The aim is to create food security. Let's in fact also delve into this other top story that we are tracking for you this afternoon, and of course that is related to food insecurity across the globe. As many as 309 million people are facing acute levels of food insecurity across the globe. In fact, we do have with us Agri SA CEO Johan Kotzé, who joins us now just to weigh in on this particular story. Mr. Kotzé, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Just in terms of what we are faced with now, there is, of course, the World Food Programme's 2024 data that has been released with some rather shocking, picture of what we are looking at when you look at the insecurity levels. Another report, a local one this time, of the South African Food Security Index of 2024, which is developed by two economists from the University of Stellenbosch, indicates that food security in this country is at its lowest point in over a decade. I mean, what are your observations on our levels of food security at this point?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, for us as agriculturists in South Africa, food security is why we exist. So if you talk about agriculture, the main goal of agriculture is to make sure that the country is food secure. So it is indeed a shock when you read through all the documentation and the specific reports you refer to. Maybe just a comment on that. So the first thing is, we need to ask ourselves, what is our mind and how do we see food security? And I'm talking about all of us, because I think sometimes we have a misunderstanding of what the word food security means. And so for us as Agri SA, or primary producers in South Africa, we say to ourselves, we need to kind of define that and see where we are lacking and where we are weak. And then what we do is we go back and see if we can contribute to better that weakness and turn it into a strength. Because South Africa has the capacity to make sure that all South Africans are food secure. And it should not be. So we don't have a lack of food. I think that's the first thing we need to say. And we've learned through last year's drought, the mechanisms we put in place, and field crops specifically, helped us to be able to maintain and sustain food security. But food security is not just about having enough food. It's also about the availability of food to people. It's about certain diets people are having. Is it safe, nutritious? So I think there's more than just the term food security. So I think the first thing is there's no fear that we don't have enough food in South Africa. We do. But there are other factors we need to look into, what we need to change and add.
Yeah. And I mean, just to your point, as you are, of course, indicating that the problems aren't really or could not necessarily be because we have, a shortage of food. It then makes one wonder, just in terms of this report that I've just mentioned earlier, I mean, highlighting one of, the points that, by the South African report is that on average, more South Africans, in fact, experienced greater or deeper food insecurity in 2023 compared to any other year between 2012 and 2023. It then makes one wonder where exactly the gaps lie, because we also know, of course, that there's been extremely high food prices in this country over the past 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I think two things about that. We export about 50% of what we produce, and we do that without state subsidies, and we compete with the best in the world, so we still could do it. So affordability is not just the price of food, but affordability for us South Africans is the inequality in income. So you have a lot of poverty in South Africa, and poor people just don't have the means and ends to buy food. So affordability, one aspect of affordability is the price of food, of which we are, I would say we can compete with the rest of the world without having subsidies. So we can produce food at a relative, I would say, manageable price. However, the income of the majority of South Africans are not there, and they are not able to buy the food. So again, food security is not an availability of food in the sense we don't have enough food. If people don't have the money to buy food, they are food insecure, even though the food is on the shelves. So the food prices in South Africa, if you compare it with the rest of the world, we are not outrageous. And the price of food in South Africa is not above the norm, by no means. But there's many other factors that work into that. Maybe just something on the affordability. I think climate change is a big one. And what I mean by climate change is the sporadic change in production due to climate change. So if you have a drought, there's a shock impact where there's no food, and then you have the rise of price of food. That's what we experienced during the COVID era. So, but then the price of food is not the issue. It is climate change and the effect of climate change into the production system that we need to look into to take out the shocks of not having food or not having, say, regular supply of food in the retailers' space.
I mean, it just brings the concern, though, that even though we do, have some level of accessibility to food, you still have people dying from hunger and poverty, which is a concern. So yesterday, of course, we saw the Department of Agriculture in KwaZulu-Natal, just talking about several programs it has already implemented in the drought-stricken province, including, of course, assisting subsistence farmers in order to address the ongoing hunger and poverty challenges that we are talking about. I mean, how important a role do you think does government and the community, I might add, play here in as far as these farmers are concerned?
So the take of food security is not a farming concept only. It's not farmers that kind of create food security in South Africa. It's the whole food value chain, the food system that we utilize, from where we produce food until we get to a point where people can eat or have access to food. And in that, government plays a major role. But government is one player. There are so many players in between. It's shocking if you think that people are still dying in South Africa by not having food. It's not acceptable. But if you just take waste, whatever we produce, about 30 to 35% is wasted in the food chain from where we produce it until it reaches where it's available for consumers to buy. But that is not just a farming concept. Government needs to play a role. Communities need to play a role. Retailers need to play a role. So you look at the whole food system. And I think what this reporting does, and I think the focus from our side on food security in South Africa, it plays a co-responsibility on people to say it's unacceptable that people die of hunger. And how do we overcome this? And I think governments play is big, where they can play into the management of risk and mitigation of risk, specifically in natural disasters like a drought or a flood or hail or whatever we want to do with it. Small scale people contribute a huge amount to food security, specifically in rural areas. And the moment that they experience that, they literally do not have the means and access to finance or to maintain themselves to overcome that. And that's where you have a government like an older brother playing a greater role into that space. And if you think of it, it's not actually supporting the farmers. It's overcoming food insecurity in that specific place. So food security, sometimes we think, yes.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, Johan. Thank you so much for that. Of course, that's Agri SA CEO Johan Kotzé, as we observe International Community World Food Day across, of course, the globe.